coming out tonight. This event was planned, organized, and thought through and brought to you by Save the Tides. All right? There are many things that I would rather be doing, many other things you folks would rather be doing, so thank you for coming out tonight. We also thank our county officials for joining us this evening, and thank you for working with us for this evening. All right, so just like last time, can everybody hear back there? Turn it up. All right. How's that? Okay. Just like last time, we're going to start off with a prayer. It's been a while. So basically, instead of having Eric come up, it's too loud. There we go. How's that? Just something real quick from Matthew 16:15. And Judas asked, "What are you willing to give me if I deliver him over to you?" So the Pharisees counted out for him 30 pieces of silver. Ladies and gentlemen, this that passage is relevant for what's going on simply because we can't sell out and sacrifice our convictions. We can't do that. But the fact of the matter is, this zoning process is going to go forward. The discussion is going to go forward. And we appreciate Mr. Tu coming here this evening, and he'll have a chance to say some things. He's the attorney for the development. So this is a discussion we're going to have, and this discussion is moving forward. Next, I'd like to say the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, next real quick, I'd like to introduce our Save the Tides officers. Where's Ed Nutfissel at? Go on, Ed's kick the seat. And then we have Ron Stevens. Everybody gets his emails. If you haven't received an email from Ron Stevens, you need to sign up. All right, next we have Ron Rontz, the treasurer. Show everybody your square that you got. All right, so we can take payments for the t-shirts, I believe, donations. Our treasurer is prepared this evening to take your plastic. Next, we've got Kim and Colleen, who help out with communications. Thank you. Every one of us put time and effort, and this will continue. All right, next. I'm sorry? Oh, Dan, I'm sorry. My goodness. Dan. I had you written down here, Dan, and I skipped over you. I apologize. Thank you, Dan. He's been a great asset to us this time around. I'm sorry?
I'll keep you straight.
All right, so next, let's go ahead and move in and segue to the next topic, which is going to be introductions and opening remarks by county staff on on permitting, fence clearances, land use, zoning, and other issues as we toil through this process. Now keep in mind, the county's here, and they're not going to show any favoritism one side or the other, because if they do, one side or the other could challenge that later in court. This is purely an informative question and answer, an informative meeting tonight. There's no decisions going to be made tonight. All right, it's all part of just educating the public and what to expect. So I was going to read the bio of your new county administrator, Barry Birdman. I was all set and ready to read that bio, but unfortunately your county administrator had to take off to Chicago yesterday, and he couldn't be here with us this evening. So, Assistant County Administrator Jake Stowers is here, as well as Blake Lyon. That's Lion, not Lions. I put an S on here and you immediately corrected me. And Ms. Hernandez. So thank you very much for joining us this evening. And I'd like to go ahead and, who's starting first from the county? You, Blake? Okay. And you, Mike, sir.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity being here tonight. I want to make sure this is, there we go. I'm here, as Mr. Strickland had mentioned, to kind of give you access to information to help educate if there's an opportunity about the county's land use and zoning review process. I was also asked to speak a little bit because there was some concern about the difference between a zoning clearance and the permitting process. And then lastly, to speak a little bit on the code enforcement side. So those are the three main topics that I intend to cover with you tonight, and then certainly helpful to ask additional questions, or answer additional questions that you might have. Any of you that were in early and were able to get one of these seats up front should have had on your seat this graphic. It's going to be behind you in 2 different slides, so we'll go through the first part. The portion that I'm hoping that you'll take away from this evening's discussion, first and foremost, is the distinction between a public meeting and a public hearing. Okay, and there's a notable difference that I want to make sure you're aware of. So as we go through this process, you can understand how best to communicate your thoughts, feelings, concerns to those that are in a decision-making capacity. So as you look through that, those different steps, anything that is shaded in the blue background, so for example, steps 1 and 2, we do not have an application that has been submitted to the county yet. If one is to be submitted to the county, we will start in this sequencing. A lot of questions that I get is, well, how long is it going to take? And there's a lot of variables that can come into that discussion. So I want to focus tonight a little bit more on the process and not exactly on the timeline because there are so many variables. So step 1 and 2 are those public meetings. The public is allowed to attend those meetings. There is not an opportunity for engagement. Those 2 meetings are staff-driven, internal discussions, opportunities for staff to understand the scope and the scale of what has been submitted and brought forth so that they can develop a key understanding of the various different aspects and components to the development proposal and make a recommendation to higher up bodies. So while you are fully capable of coming and attending, taking notes and observing and participating from an observation standpoint, there isn't the opportunity to engage in those elements. If it proceeds beyond that point, step 3 is the first opportunity for a public hearing. That's the stuff that's identified in here with the orange shaded background. The first one you'll see is in step 3. That's our local planning agency. These are members that are appointed by the County Board of Commissioners to serve, and they're looking at land use related type of issues. And in their process, they have the opportunity to take public comment. Typically the way that works, there's 2 distinctions in the way that works. If you are there representing yourself and your own opinions and concerns, you are given 3 minutes to make your comments orally to the local planning agency. If you choose to identify a representative for a smaller group of people, that individual can get up to 10 minutes, and they can make their comments known at that point in time. If you are concerned that you cannot get your comments out in either the 3-minute increment or the 10-minute increment, you are always welcome to provide your comments in writing that can be considered. I will tell you though, for those boards, it's often helpful for them to receive that in advance of their particular meeting so they can give that full consideration. If you're walking up to the podium and handing it to them, it's hard for them to absorb the depth and breadth of your information and the concerns you might have right there in the meeting. Okay, so any of the advanced comments in writing is certainly beneficial and helpful for them to understand the scope and the scale of your questions and comments. The local planning agency then makes a recommendation to the Board of County Commission. In this set of scenarios, and this is one of a couple different scenarios, This is a large-scale request, given the size of the property that is being brought into question. The Board of County Commissioner under step 4 takes that consideration, and then they decide at that point whether or not they are going to transmit the information to the state. If they choose not to and they decline right then and there, the process ends. If they decide they want to consider it and transmit it to the state, then we move to step 5. That written notice is prepared, and the distinction that I want to make on this graphic for you between steps 6 and 7 are those steps happen simultaneously. There is, Pinellas County is unique, and I'm happy to go into individual responses to give you a little bit of the background on the difference between zoning and land use. And there are some distinctions that are out there. The county is also one of 2 counties in the state of Florida that has a countywide planning authority. And the short explanation of that is simply that we have 24 cities and counties. There's 25 local governments. The state identified a countywide planning authority to try to look at collaborative issues and look at some consistency and compatibility between those local governments. Okay? So in this process, step 6A is the countywide planning authority. There is another group called Forward Pinellas that works through those issues, and they have their own staff that will have a public meeting, which is step 6A, and then they will recommend to their internal board, which is step 6B, and they'll have a public hearing associated with that. The state also has multiple departments that would get involved in evaluating this type and this scale of project development. So they will also go through their review, and the different agencies at the state level will be taking their process forward. Ultimately, those 2 then merge back, coming back in front of the County Board of Commissioners as the final decision-making body once they've received the state's decision and the decision from Forward Pinellas. And then that ultimately ends in a final decision at step 8. The other thing is that whatever that decision may be in the future, if we get to that point, that's a written notice. And then there's always, anytime there's a public hearing like that, there's an appeal process associated with that, and that can move forward. So the thing, if you take nothing away from my comments other than this tonight, is there will be multiple steps and multiple opportunities for you all to make comments and to be heard through this process. I know for those that don't deal with this land use and zoning type stuff, there can be lots of questions about how best to make your comments, how to engage, how to understand the nuances of some of those things. So I'll leave the land use and zoning portion of my comments tonight at that and move into a couple others. But if you do have questions, I want to make sure that you have the opportunity to be able to ask those questions. The other opportunity for you to get involved and engaged, many of you came through the front doors here. If you came in, you saw the sign-in that was on your right where the green t-shirts were. That's the sign-in for the Save the Bay, Save the Times folks, excuse me. And then the table to your left was the county sign-in. If you want to receive communications from the county about the steps and the processes moving forward, please make sure you sign in at the county table as well. That's our opportunity to communicate with you. One of the things that our marketing and communications folks are going to be doing is having the opportunity to take a survey. We do have an iPad here. You can do that tonight. If there's a long line, if you have signed up in the county's list, we can send that out to you via SurveyMonkey, and you can give feedback in that regard. So there are opportunities, or if you prefer to leave your comments about tonight's interaction, we have some comment cards and you can put that in that. So that's certainly an opportunity for you to give us feedback about tonight's activities. All right, the second thing that I was asked to talk to you about tonight, I don't have a graphic for, but it was really the distinction. Many of you that have communicated with me either by phone or by email have expressed some concerns and frustrations about the difference between a zoning clearance and a permit. And I realize we're getting into some of the semantics of what I do for a profession. I'm going to try to be very clear about that distinction. A zoning clearance is something that is a by right use. And somebody is allowed to do that based on the codes and ordinances that we have in place. And it's the county staff's opportunity to verify a few details. Location, height, materials, details like that that are involved. And this is in particular regards to the perimeter fence that was installed around the property. Okay, so they have a right to install a fence. Many of you may have fences around your own private residences. You have the same opportunity. They are afforded the same as a by right use, and we give them that zoning clearance to verify those details. A permit references some distinct look at structural or some other issues that come into play. Foundation details may be involved a little bit more. In Pinellas County's codes, a fence does not require a building permit unless it exceeds 6 feet in height. So in the situation that existed out here on the Tice property, they have the opportunity to come in, apply for the zoning clearance, get that, and as long as they're installing it on their private property in accordance with the location, the height, the materials, and in this situation they have the ability to install the chain link fence and use the mesh backing. All of that is a by right use. Okay? So that's a distinction that I'm trying to provide some degree of clarity for you tonight. If there's, again, additional questions, we'll be here to answer some of those. The last comment...
Blake, if I can mention real quick, I forgot to say to the people in the crowd at around 7:30 or so, we are going to have a question and answer session because I know there's a lot of questions out here.
Yeah.
So.
And I apologize if I'm going through this relatively quickly. I anticipate that there will be a lot of questions, so I'm trying to get the information to you and then be able to respond to those questions as they come up. The third thing that I was asked to talk to you about was the code enforcement action. Many folks have expressed some concerns or frustration or just simply have a lack of information about what the process is around that. The county gets complaints about various different codes that we have in place. Our code enforcement officers go out to the property, identify if the complaint is valid, determine whether or not there's a violation. We provide a warning notice to the property owners and give them an opportunity to correct. Under state law, we have to give them a reasonable time to correct. Now, the first question that always comes up is what's reasonable? And it's not defined in the state legislation. It's open to interpretation. Okay, and so we have to give them reasonable time to correct. We give them an opportunity to do that. If they don't come into compliance with that warning notice and it's still a violation, we will go back and we will issue a citation. The citations were issued on this particular Tice property in early November of this year that identified two violations. The first of which was the growth of grass and other vegetation on the property exceeded our thresholds and requirements. And the second was the deterioration of the clubhouse building that's out there. And so those two were brought forth, violation notices were issued. Once we issue from the county's perspective those violation notices, the timeline comes out of our control and goes into the court system. There's a local ordinance violation court that sets a arraignment timeline. It's across the board, 5 weeks. Once that arraignment goes to the court, 5 weeks, the judge can make a determination depending on the property owner's response, whether to set that for pre-trial and then trial, or whether there's a plea of no contest or guilty, and then we can move forward. In this situation, the property owners pled no contest to the violations, and they indicated the desire to address them and correct them. The judge then sets sentencing, and the sentencing was set for May 1st. I don't control it. It's that's out of my control in terms of the timeline and the processing of that. If there's a repeat violation that comes up, we can then take an issue to special magistrate to deal with things of that nature. But that's the timeline we are. We've reached out to the property owners. Again, they have pled no contest to the issues and concerns. They have submitted a maintenance plan. They've indicated a desire to address these issues. And again, they're addressing that directly through the courts right now, not through the county, but we'll be aware of what's going on and look to address those issues. So that's the nature of the code enforcement component. The other issue, the distinction that I wanted to provide for you, there were some concerns that were brought up about the signs that many of you all have placed in your front yards, and the distinction, and there was some concern that the county was stealing signs or taking signs out of the front properties. And the distinction I want to draw for you there is the county is responsible for the public right-of-way. So that's front property line on somebody's house here. There may be a couple of feet before you get to a sidewalk, if there is one. The street, then the other side of the street. Anything that's placed in that public right-of-way, we remove so that it's not a liability on the county. Anything that you want to place on your own private property, in your own front yards, you're free to do. Okay, that's not something that we're going to push that issue unless we get a complaint or somebody saying there's a proliferation or an issue that we have to deal with there. But I wanted, for your benefit, if you are interested in doing that, just know that distinction and that difference. If we do get to the point where we collect them, we keep them in our office. When folks want to come back and collect them and get their property back, they're welcome to do that. That's where we stand on the code enforcement issue. So I'm looking at the clock, it's right 7:30, so I want to be respectful and move forward. And I believe you're going to call up for Jake. Do you have anything else you want to add?
I think Jake wanted to add something.
I'm Jake Stowers, Assistant County Administrator. Barry does. I'm Jake Stowers, Assistant County Administrator.
They can't hear you, Jake.
I've been under the weather. Jake Stowers, I'm Assistant County Administrator. Got that one? Okay. Started off wrong, we got it. Barry Burton was out of town on an emergency, actually, so that's why he couldn't be here. He did want to be here, I will tell you, because we believe it's extremely important that the community understand we're a neutral party. We have certain laws and rules we have to follow. And the thing like the courts, he was saying, you all think it's frustrating? We probably have 300 outstanding cases, so they just said, but that's another story. But anyhow, wanted to let you know that the process is, and we've had numerous people ask, and Blake mentioned this, the timeline. There isn't a timeline. It's driven by many, many different things that might go on. And so that just goes through the process. But the important thing is what he was saying, where you can step in, where you can step in and listen, and where you can step in and discuss and give your opinion. Those are very important. So we will, and I assure you, will be notified, you all, particularly if we've got you over there, all the time of those notices of what's coming up, and not a day or two ahead, because I will tell you, even those notices, we have to have them turned in 3 or 4 weeks ahead of time. So if we've produced something, it's weeks out from the hearing, but we've already produced it. So we wanted to make sure that you understood we're here to offer as much assistance as we can to you all. We will be working with the developer, obviously, because that's the way these processes work. There's a zoning change request or a land use change request, and they are different. A land use can be X and have a lot of zonings in it. So if it was commercial, for instance, I have 5 or 6 zoning categories. But anyhow, so we're going to do our best to keep you informed, to be available to the degree we can with the information we have at the time. We are not going to try to put it aside or any of that kind of stuff. That isn't going to happen. This is not, I will tell you, the first time there's ever been a controversy. I've lived in the county 36 years. Trust me, this is not the first time there's ever been something that's very controversial. And they can be big, they can be tiny, but this is a real process, is what happens. And as a community, everyone has the right to be heard, and everyone has the right to go forward. Board of County Commission makes the ultimate decision. Not state. Also, if it goes to the state, there's some issues there. But anyhow, so I just wanted to say that I really appreciate the group, you all coming out. This is a very good community support, I would think, that's coming out for your organization. So do we want to go to?
Yes, we're going to move into the next section, but thank you very much for your 35 years of service. You have been in Pinellas County almost as long as the Tides. Almost. All right. So, yeah, moving on here. I think we're going to go ahead and move into our question and answer section. All right, we've got a roaming mic over here, so we can move into that. But I would ask, though, that the folks who live on the golf course, since they are looking at a black funeral shroud every morning when they wake up, I'm sure that they have some things to talk about. So anybody that lives on the golf course, raise your hand. And if you want to say something, ask a question. And keep in mind, all right, there's no decisions tonight. You're all here and all here to listen and respond and have a nice conversation. Yes, sir. Ron Stevens back there.
We're talking about the distinction between the designation of the land, in the case of the Tides, it's recreational open space, and also the zoning. The zoning is AE on the uplands, and it's AL on the wetlands. What supersedes? Does the land designation supersede and overcome the zoning? Is the land designation most important?
Did everybody hear the question? Yeah, all right. So, the answer to that question is they're both important, and the more restrictive of the two, whichever that may be, is the one that is the greatest limiting factor. Okay, so in this instance, you have, as was mentioned, and let me provide a little distinction between land use and zoning. Land use is, if you think about it in terms of economics, land use is the macro version. That's the big scale. That's where all the policies are driven, and you draw the map or the colors on the map in a very broad brush. And so you say, okay, this area is for residential, this area is for open space, this area is for commercial and industrial, and it's done at a very broad level, and there's policies and directions that come out of a comprehensive plan that drive that land use discussion. Zoning is the microeconomics. That's where the regulations come into play. That's the little details about where a building can be put, how much land you can cover, the regulatory side of that piece of it. And so in a county or in a local city, you will have both of those distinctions, and there's a desire for those to be compatible. That's not always the case, but if they are conflicting, it's the more restrictive of the two. And in this situation, the recreation open space, that is the land use discussion, has some bearing, and any development proposal that results in some change in use would require to amend that land use discussion. What was formerly known as AE that got changed January 1st to RA, which is residential agriculture, sets the zoning regulations and criteria for housing on that particular property. But until that land use portion is changed, they would need to address that if they were moving forward with a residential application.
Hey Blake, if the owner of the property, the golf course, would like to build some goodwill in the neighborhood, is there any prohibition from them removing the black fence or the black funeral shroud until construction actually starts?
The county's
If construction actually starts.
the county's requirement for a fence is when you are there are different setbacks. Those are distancing requirements from property lines. And in the county's requirements, if they are within the first 50 feet of where 66 goes with the parking lot, then they would have to put a decorative portion on that area. Everywhere else around the property, if they stay back 50 feet from the front portion of 66 or around the other perimeter portions, there is not a requirement to the materials that are used. So they have the ability to do the chain link and to do the black meshing. They have the right not to do the black meshing. That is not a distinction that is created or defined by the county.
Any other questions?
As you might know, we went through
Hey,
this.
Ron, let's wait for the mic up.
That's all right. As you might know, about 4 years ago, we went through the same process with a challenge and an application to change the zoning. How many times does this community have to go through this? How many times can they keep coming back to you over and over again? And how many times do we have to win before this is all over? When I moved in 35 years ago, I was told there was a zoning change on that property 35 years ago when I lived there. It was at the county's request that that property be changed to recreational open space. I called them. I said, do I need to come to this meeting? They said, no, this is wonderful for you. This means that the property is going to be a golf course for a long, long time. They probably said forever. I don't remember. But how many times do we have to go through this? How many times do we have to spend our money and keep going through this process if they get denied?
Yeah.
The answer to that question is as many times as they submit an application to the county. They have the right as a private property owner to submit an application and go through the process that we were describing. Whether they're successful or unsuccessful doesn't prohibit them or prevent them from reconsidering it or moving forward in the future. They have the right to ask the question and to go through the process. And if they are not successful this time around, I cannot give you the guarantee you're looking for that somebody in the future wouldn't do the same in a future point in time.
And so no decision ever sets a precedent, like in courts, that says, okay, this has already been tried and won, and
No, sir. They have the ability to go back through. There are some provisions in the code that if denied, they can't come back within a certain timeline, but many instances in those scenarios, it's 6 months or a year. It's not, So they have the right to apply. They have the right to go through the process. They have the right to go through the decision-making that's brought forward.
All right.
So I'm with the previous speaker.
Hey, sir. Here's a mic there, so they're ready for
We went through this whole routine 4 or 5 years ago. The county and the commissioners and the planning department decided in their wisdom that this was a no-go. So having said that, why are we doing all this all over again? Are you as a committee prepared to go back
Let's all ask
on your
that same question.
decisions? In other words, your decisions were wrong in the first place? And in fact, also this developer, under false pretenses, says it's a golf course. In the meantime, has let it go to fallow land, which means it's no longer a cash-producing entity. So I don't care what they do, but they've lost their cash flow and made it exceedingly difficult, for someone else to come in now and rejuvenate that golf course, make it a viable concern. And to say, going back to my first question with the other party, the county already recommended zip, no. How can you go back on your word?
Let me offer this for your consideration. The previous application that was submitted in 2013 was under a different ownership. This owner has the right to ask the question to go through the process. There were different members on the Board of County Commission at that time. Not all of them, but several of them were different. There were different regulations, different circumstances. They have the right to go back through the process. We cannot deny them that right to ask the question and go through that process.
All right.
I
Any
have
other questions? Yes, sir.
Along the same lines, and there was a report done after that study 4 years ago, and to my knowledge, it was never published to the general public, and I think we have a right to see that report and review it, and and take that into consideration as we fight this. Because, we're in the most populated county in the state, and we have been for 70 years. And we're built out. This is like the last vestige of an open piece of property left. And I'd like to see that report that was done, and so that we could all take that into consideration. As far as I know, that it was never published; just the decision was published. I have other considerations and other opinions, but that's my direct question.
I'd certainly like to understand a little bit more about the report you're talking about, but let me offer this general comment to that, is the county's records under Florida state law are open to public information requests. So if we get that public information request, we're required by law to produce that documentation.
We've asked for it, it has been produced.
Okay, and I don't know the specifics of what you're talking about. So if there is such a thing and we know what you're talking about, we can certainly do the research, and if it exists, we will provide that public record.
All right, yes, ma'am.
I have a quick question. If they are denied, can that same party who owns the property come up again in a couple of years, or does it have to be a new owner?
So the question is, if the current property owner is denied their request to consider a rezoning or a change in the land use, can they come back at a future point in time? And the answer is yes. They have that right.
Yes, sir.
I wasn't here 4 years ago, but I feel your pain. Has anybody, here's my question, has anybody formally or informally made a proposal for some governmental entity to buy this land? We saw in the newspaper last week where the mayor of Seminole said that the city is fiscally sound and the state of the city is fantastic. I think we probably also got plenty of money available in Pinellas County. So has anybody made that kind of an effort? Because we could certainly use a golf course over here where it's been all these years.
That is something that I would encourage you to express to the Board of County Commissioners. That's above my pay grade in terms of spending the county money in that respect, so I can't really indicate to you whether or not that has been evaluated or considered. Jake may wish to speak to that, but
We followed 2000 first.
Having bought a few thousand acres in Pinellas County for the county, the first thing that has to happen is a will and seller. We do not buy environmental land.
I need a willing seller.
First thing that have to happen is a willing seller. All the properties that we've bought have been brought to us and said, would you buy this? The county does not use eminent domain, which we can use for roads and things we do there. We won't use it for environmental land, we never have. So for us to make, well, because that's board policy, we have to for years. You gotta have an extreme, pardon? I don't know. I mean, that's the next step, if there is a willing seller. I mean, all sorts of things have to happen. We need to do a phase 1 and a phase 2. So you don't just, that's an environmental assessment. You don't just go out and just say, oh, great, thanks, bring it here. But it has to be a willing seller. The board won't go condemn it. We have a lot of environmental properties in the county. We've got some 20,000 acres that we oversee. So it's not like we don't have any greens.
With land, with Millennium Park coming right on down through the golf course. There is no other vacant, open, natural piece of property left in the whole county. Now that should be enough of a motivator for the county to actually almost, if there's going to be an eminent domain, why not there? Because it's environmental, it serves many purposes with recreation, it also prevents water damage and flood damage. I mean, ideally, if we're moving forward as a society and taking into consideration climate change and all those things, this is an opportunity, this piece of property is something the county should desire, and just for our well-being. So I think the county should really take that into consideration of wanting to buy it.
I did not say we did not want to buy it. I said the board doesn't use eminent domain to move forward on environmental properties. That's where Mr. Lyon was correct. If you want to write them and say this is one that has to be done this way, you can do it. So it's not, you just got to have an awful lot of strong public purpose to have eminent domain take over. It's a whole other process.
Yes, sir, gentlemen.
Who's responsible for updating the infrastructure impact? Because that has a major decision point as to whether this project should go forward. When you look at the traffic and everything else, there was a study presumably done once upon a time, you know, back in 2008 or whatever. Who is the responsible party to bring that up? So when it comes up for a vote, the commission is well informed as to what the impact is and the negative impact.
The question was about who's responsible for doing the various different studies. And this is a part of the distinction. Tonight's efforts and the graphics that you saw talk a little bit more about land use discussion and zoning. Some of the impacts that you're referencing are more appropriately identified when there's a project and a scope of development that has actually been proposed, and we evaluate that as part of what's called the site plan process. So we know for a fact what the request is in terms of if it's residential, the number of units, if it's commercial, the square footage, if it's industrial, you know, all of these various different things. We can go out and we can evaluate the potential impacts of those specific uses. That is done as a subsequent process after the land use and zoning decision has been made.
So presumably you already have that from the last time.
The question was, presumably we had some of that information done. If memory serves me correctly, and bear with me if I'm getting this incorrect, but that recommendation came from the staff at one of those earlier process. I think it was in the order of the step 3 or 4, and didn't ever get to the Board of County Commission. It was withdrawn by the applicant at that point in time. So I'd have to go back and see if those studies were actually conducted, because it may have been premature at the time they withdrew their application. Yes, ma'am.
I know there's only 3% green space left in this county, 3%, and every developer will come in and build till there's nothing left. And he doesn't even live in this county. So the county people that make these decisions do need to be thinking about that. But I had a couple of questions about the fence, because I'm one of the people that's unlucky enough to get up and see it right out my back door every day. I tried to call your office and never could get through to you. I talked to several people and nobody could give me any answers. But when they were installing the fence, there were a few violations that were made, and we were completely blown off about it. I understand it's a zoning clearance, not a fence permit. I understand that, and I also understand that it was written in that they had to be 15 feet from the trunks of trees. I understand they don't have to do that, but what's the point in writing it in if you're not going to have them do it? And they did use an auger 2 foot from a banyan tree. I watched them. And when we told you that they were using an auger next to our tree, it's a good 25 feet. You said it wasn't a tree.
All right,
So I'm really confused. And wait, one more question. Hang on. I know that's just part of it. With the black mesh, I understand he can do whatever he wants with that. But why? It doesn't serve the purposes that it's there for. It's either there for privacy, which I know it's not being used for that, and it's not being used to control any kind of construction debris. So what's he doing it for? It's going to be he's being a jerk. And you let him put it on the easement. Parts of that fence are on the easement, and we lost that. We lost our yard because you allowed him to put it on an easement. Not the whole thing, but parts of it. Why?
All right, so let's break that down a little bit. So the first thing about the zoning clearance is we indicated on that zoning clearance that we wanted terminal posts. Terminal posts are the posts that provide structural integrity to a fence. It's a fence post that has a concrete footer or some other structural base to that and holds the fence upright. That terminal post was to be 15 feet away from the tree. They then, if you think of the microphone stand as the tree itself, the fence post goes over here, there's a 15-foot span, then there's another fence post over here. That's a 30-foot span between terminal posts. A chain link fence will not stand up with that, it can be pushed over and put, so they have the opportunity to come in and put in what we call line posts, which the line posts are vibrated into the soil and put in there so that they don't impact any of the root zone and do that. Now, so that's the general parameter that the fence zoning clearance was provided with. There are some distinctions, and this is where this is a good process if we can provide a little education. The county has a requirement that talks about, and this is where I know I'm going to get a lot of oohs and ahs coming back, the distinction of a tree. Most people will say that you look at something that comes out of the ground, has branches and leaves, and that's a tree. Okay, there is a distinction under the county code that talks about specimen trees and the separation, and they provide a distinction for hardwoods and for softwoods, and we talk about protecting and preserving those. The distinction that we make is what's not a tree, and this is where it's going to come at you. Palms are not trees. Palms are a grass. Okay, well, a palm has a different root structure and is not protected under the ordinance. Is not protected. The only times. Pardon me? Okay. Well, we went back out. We went through.
You walked out with your suit. You didn't walk the altar. They altered a tree. So when they kill my tree, are you going to fix it? Are you going to take care of it? The county, we saw them do it. Sandy saw them do it. My wife saw them do it. We're talking about native trees. Let's talk about any other kind of tree, a hardwood tree.
Okay. Well, and I'm sorry I didn't hear that last one. So we have.
We told you about it. You never came out.
I did come out.
Words out.
I came out on several occasions. We also
You
had
never met
staff.
with us. We asked you to meet with us and you didn't come. Stevie, did we ask you 10 times?
Did you have a question, sir?
You know what the question was. Move the fence back off the easement. You should have
All right.
asked-
I want to address the easement question that was also raised, because that was another thing that came up this evening. So the county has a drainage easement on different portions of the private property. An easement is a right for use. When we have stormwater issues that come into play, we have the opportunity for the ability for that stormwater to collect and to run through. The county has an interest in protecting and preserving that easement. The fence does not prevent or preclude our use and utilization of that easement. We included in the zoning clearance the need for gates to provide access so that we can get in and utilize that easement at the point it was necessary. We also communicated with the property owner if there's a desire or a need to get additional access that the gate does not provide, we have the opportunity to get in and do that kind of stuff. So the county protected its interest in the easement. The other thing I want to stress is that the fence that is installed on private property. They have the right to do that. No, they have the right to put it in the easement. They cannot prevent access from the easement, which we preserved our right to that easement. But we can't prevent them. It's still their private property. The easement is still on their private property. I cannot sit here and tell them not to put a fence on the easement. I can tell them that we need to have access to that easement and we need the right to utilize that easement, but I cannot tell them not to put a fence on the easement.
You said you take down signs off the right of way.
This is the difference is this is private property.
So he owns the entire easement?
They own the land under the easement. We have a right of use. Okay, that's where our responsibility, and that's the distinction. I know there may be folks that don't prefer that definite description, but that's the decision and that's the rules that we have to be following, and that's what allows. Many of you all have easements on the rear of your property for drainage purposes, for access purposes, for utility purposes, and you all may have rear yard fences and side yard fences. You're allowed to put those fences in the easement the same way they are. If there's a need to get access to that easement, that will be communicated to the property owner, and there's an obligation to provide access to that easement.
So Jake, is there a way that everybody can contact you if they have easement and fencing questions?
I have,
I know you got to work.
at the front counter, I've got my card that has my access, my phone number to my desk and my email. If you all email me, it might take me a little while to get back to you, but I have been in contact with those folks that have reached out to me.
Moving past the fence issue,
There's a question up here. There's a question up here.
was to discuss the redevelopment of the Tide open space. And we direct all our comments and directions to that. I would feel then that my time spent here was much more worthwhile than local residents with a fence problem, which I'm sure is important to them. But
Hey.
to me, living in the neighborhood, is the redevelopment of the Tides open space, which is why I'm here, and that's what I want to hear.
Well,
Okay.
sir, that's the reason why we are here. That's the reason why I'm here. That's the reason why we set this up this evening. Okay, sir? We feel your pain. She has a question that would probably hit your topic right on point. Go ahead.
So in circumstances like this, we're often driven by our concern for the problems, but ultimately we want to reach solutions. And there's a lot of wisdom in this room, one of them being Jake. Jake's been serving our community for 35 years, and you said that this has happened in the past. So I think an instructive question that we can ask for Jake is, in your 35 years, have you seen cases that are similar to this, where the community was concerned and prevailed? And if so, are there any cases that you remember that we can use so that we too can prevail and preserve this important space?
I would say prevail is the important word. In other words, prevailed over on your side, over on the developer side, or came together.
Speak up!
Often what happens, I
Preserving the
said,
community.
prevailing is, it's what you call prevailing. If prevailing is nothing happens at the tides, that would be very difficult, I think, because you're going to end up, I mean, in Florida, you have a property right. Each one of us in our homes has a property right, just like the right to fence our home. So there's certain things that go that way that you aren't going to be able to change. It just isn't going to happen. The best way is to be engaged. That's going to be critically important. That's why we've given you all these timelines. You need to get engaged. You need to correspond. You need to be looking at what's being proposed. I mean, there may be something that'd be fabulous. I don't know. I get doubt that, but let's say there would be. And that's the way to get it done. Have I known of any that prevail fully? There's probably been some, but I will tell you they're probably on a magnitude much smaller. Mostly on big properties like this. I don't know, let's take some. East Lake Woodlands. If you know about East Lake Woodlands, it's a huge property. Ridgemore, Tarpon Woods. They all had issues, particularly as the phases went through, because often what they got is land use and zoning, like was saying. So now you got that. But you took this piece to develop that piece with the current land use and zoning. Land use and zoning then runs with the land. So it may be 10 years before you look at the next development. Well, that means there's 10 years of neighbors all of a sudden. And, you know, nothing against the real estate community or nothing against how we look at our properties when we buy them. Do we really go through it and analyze it and know what's coming next door? Often not. There's a whole bunch of woods. Isn't that neat? Yeah, it's a condo on the plan. So the most important thing I could say is be engaged. Keep listening, keep talking. And throw out comments. more than likely, I believe you're going to have the developer want to talk with you all. I mean, if you don't want to talk, that's another thing, but it is owned by someone else.
Hey, Jake, we can't talk to our county commissioners now, and you mentioned getting engaged in this process. How do you specifically suggest that we get engaged in this process?
You can't talk to county commissioners. You can talk to all of the staff. You can go to these hearings. You can go to these hearings and talk to the appointed staff, I guess is the best way. The LPA is not the county commission. Most of these bodies are recommending. The only decision maker is the Board of County Commissioners. That's who you can't talk directly to. But if they get information, why? Well, this goes a lot bigger than us. It goes to state law. It's a quasi-judicial hearing. They're making a legislative decision. They're not making, I think they're making a legislative decision. Yeah. They're making, as legislators, they're in essence almost a judge. And you can't have conversation ahead of time with that. They have to look at the record, which is going to be documents that are prepared, and answer it that way.
All right, folks, do we have any more general zoning questions and process questions? We're going to get away from the fence.
General zoning question? It's not a zoning question, it's about the maintenance part of the citations. Hi, I'm on the 8th hole, formerly the 17th hole of the golf course. This is about...
Get your mic closer.
Is that better? Yeah. I have a question about how the citation issue is with the code violations with regard to the lack of care in taking care of the golf course. It's very difficult for me every morning to be able to look out there and see the difficulty by which some of the animals are having to walk through the mess that has been created by the current owner. Does he not have to do anything to it until that sentencing time? Is he just going to leave it as is in his no contest, or is he going to do anything prior to that sentencing date?
There certainly is the opportunity for them to take a proactive approach and bring the property into compliance. The way to address the property compliance issue for the overgrowth, the county's code, so that you're all aware, is that it becomes a violation when the grass grows above 12 inches from the ground. They can go out and mow and bush hog it and do that kind of stuff at any point. There's nothing that prevents them or precludes that from maintaining their property. But in order for us to go through the code enforcement action and try to levy fines and try to compel, in other words, we're not in a position to go out and do the work and perform the work. We need to incentivize, entice, compel them to do that work. They have indicated to the county that they're going to have a maintenance plan to go through that. The judge has their process to try to compel compliance in that regard. If it comes forward and they get that sentencing brought to bear, and then they mow it, let's say they bring it back into compliance. If it grows again and it exceeds that point, then we start the process over. We issue a new citation, and they go through it again.
And Jake, and that's exactly her point. Her point is the judicial process takes forever. Trust me, I can get something continued for over a year. The question is, okay, can we get this going through a special magistrate system that circumvents our archaic judicial system?
Look at the money that the county is spending with having to spray for mosquitoes and all of that because it's not being done.
Understood. And so we go through, and to Mr. Strickland's comment about that, we go through the process of identifying through the court system a first violation. It goes then, if it happens, it goes to a second violation. At that point, they become what's considered a repeat violator. And then it comes Mr. Strickland's point where we can take it to the magistrate, go through the judicial process through the special magistrate, and the special magistrate has the ability, if found guilty, to levy a daily fine, not just a one-time fine. So it can be up to, and I stress that, up to $500 a day for every day that violation exists.
So I think
How long does that?
I think her question and her point is we don't want to see the overgrowth of the golf course. We want to see this thing taken care of. And we don't want this to limbo in some bureaucracy somewhere or in some court system somewhere.
I can appreciate
And the more that you folks focus on this and help us with a system that gets that done, we'd appreciate that.
Understood.
From what you're saying, from November, if this started in November, it'll be, first time through in May. That's 7 months. If it takes 3 times to do that, we're looking at 2 years.
So you want?
Cut the grass.
Do you know how high the grass will be in 2 years?
Well, that's another question.
Yes, sir.
How, do we have any official inspecting the property to make sure the grass is not going, or is that why they have the black fence so nobody can see? Is there an
code
official going out
enforcement
there?
process, the question was, what's the inspection process like? The code enforcement process is predominantly complaint driven. So when we get a complaint, we go out and we address those
That's
complaints.
why they have the black fence up, so nobody can see. Okay, we get it.
All right, folks, we're kind of running out of time here. The gentleman in the hat back there. Go ahead, sir.
I think that we're kind of getting a little off track here and getting into the legalities and all of this stuff. When we want to accomplish something, which is to keep the area pristine. We want clean water, we want clean air, we want open space. But we're dealing, has been said, with private property rights. And I'm a believer in private property rights. Someone else mentioned they don't want government involved to the extent where we're going to infringe on a private individual's right to own and use the property as he wishes. But within the law, of course. But why don't we get together and make this person an offer? If it hasn't been, I understand there's been violations. We want the property to be used in the way we want it to be used, so we should own the property. If it comes off the property, if the county were to buy it, it would come off the rolls, which is going to impact everybody in the county. Anybody that lives at the other end of the county is going to have to absorb.
Do you have a question, sir?
Excuse me?
You have a question?
Is going to have to absorb the loss of the revenue. So we want to keep it private so that the county and everyone in the county has a benefit. But how do we do this? Well, I know of a case in Oakland, California.
Sir, we don't have all night here, okay?
I understand.
You have a question, or we're going to move on?
You know my point then. Let's do something positive.
Let's do something positive, the gentleman says. That's why we're all here tonight.
Okay, my question is, I've heard a lot about the rights of the new property owner. What about the rights of our community that was built on the Tides Golf Course? So our rights for peaceful enjoyment, our rights that we've paid taxes on, our rights that we've paid a premium on houses to live on a golf course, where are our rights? Okay, I bought and paid for, I live on the golf course, for a golf course view. That's what I bought. That's what I paid for. That's what the county has collected taxes on for umpteen million years from all of us at a higher rate, 20%. Where are our rights? You took our money. Where are our rights for you to protect under fraudulent circumstances of a failing golf course, which we all know is not true?
So let me provide a distinction for you, and I know it may be a very unfavorable comment to make, and that is the county does not have a view protection policy or ordinances. I can't tell somebody that they are guaranteed this view in perpetuity when they buy that property. You all as neighbors have individual private property rights. If you live in a single-story home and your neighbors all have single-story homes, you all have the right under the current codes and regulations to build a second, maybe even a third-story home. In doing so, you may impact your adjacent neighbor. There is no requirement under the county codes for protection of view sheds. They have the right to go through that process, ask the question about whether there's an opportunity to develop on it, and that does not prevent or preclude anybody from maintaining an existing view.
Have you taxed me at a higher rate because of my view over the years? Do you tax people on their views?
I'm not the property appraiser or the tax collector. I can't answer how they go through their tax assessment. That's outside my purview.
Let me do a follow-up on that. In 1985, we have one of the commissioners here tonight. It's Barbara Sheen Todd, sitting right there in the third row.
Ms. Barbara Sheen Todd.
In 1985, the commissioners made a decision. They said, we want to keep this time a golf course for basically forever. And he said, what we're going to do for you is we're going to make it a recreational open space, and that's going to be the land designation. And we're going to zone it AE for uplands and AL for lowlands, because that was the only designation they had at the time. With the idea that no one like these developers could ever come in and develop it, because they couldn't change the land designation. Now you're saying that that's possible to change.
I'm saying that under the current land use designation, they do not have the right to develop it, but they have the right to ask to change it. And that's the difference. The commission, whether it's now or the commission in the future, has the opportunity to take that question to heart, take the comments and the concerns that you have expressed, take that all into consideration, and they may very well come back to the same conclusion that the former commissioners did. What I'm trying to convey to you is that the property owners have the right to ask the question.
Okay, my question.
All right, this lady here, and then one more, and then we're going to be doing closing arguments, and that'll be it for the night.
Thank you. Along the zoning question.
I'm not seeing where it's coming from.
Yeah, it's right.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry. So along that line of zoning, is it possible that this property, that a permit could be filed asking for apartments? We've seen apartment complexes pop up all over the county. I believe they're referred to as multi-use, including Section 8 housing. Is it possible that they could apply for such a project for apartments and that it would be possibly go through all the paces you explained and that it could ultimately be approved?
So there's a two-part answer to that question. And the first part is, under the current zoning as it exists today, they're only allowed for single-family residential development. So just a one unit per lot configuration. So the answer under today's rules and regulations would be no. Again, they have the right to ask to change that. If they were to propose a land use and a zoning amendment that resulted in a zoning designation that allowed for multifamily as you described, and that were to go through the process and survive the decision-making process, then that could happen. There is a plausible scenario where that could happen, but that has not been brought forward to us at this point, and it's not an opportunity under today's current zoning designation.
All right, one last question, and we're going to do a close it for the night.
Okay, I have one comment and one question. My comment is that the golf course was purchased knowing what it was zoned for. So I don't have any. My second question is, and I'm going back to the fence. I live on the north side of the golf course, and the fence is about 2 feet from a ditch that drains the entire neighborhood of Canterbury Chase. Also has a culvert at the end. If that culvert gets blocked, those houses on 66 that face the golf course are going to be flooded. No, I have talked to several men at the county level I'm wondering if you can help get that fence moved back so the county can get their equipment in to clean the ditch.
So, the answer is the fence is still on private property. As we talked about before, the county needs the right to access that ditch and clean and maintain that ditch. If they're not able to do so, because of the prevention of that fence location from doing that, we can have them remove that fence to allow that equipment in, or the property owner can maintain it, to maintain that ditch. But we have the right to ask and request the removal to do that if we need to get. In fact, I was on the phone today with our Public Works Department talking about that very issue.
All right, folks, well, we're just going to have to wrap it up here. I do have some brief closing remarks. First of all, let's give Jake and the county staff an applause. If you found this artificial, would your staff and you folks be interested in stopping by and doing this at a later point in time? Okay. And last but not least, okay, last time when we fought this, and I was involved last time as well, the developer proposed a meeting. All right, I suspect that the developer will propose, like Jake said, a community meeting as well. And so I know that the attorney for the developer is here tonight. He's not going to speak, but just be advised that he may ask to meet with the residents of the community sometime in the future, okay?
It's a former county commissioner, not a current county commissioner. The question was whether the statement was whether the county commission can stand up and be recognized. And the distinction I want to make is that it's a former county commissioner. You're free and able to speak to that individual. It's the current seated county commissioners that can't engage in the discussion.
Yes, Mr. Toole is going to make a meeting announcement.
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming tonight, and I just wanted to make a brief announcement to save us from having to try to get this information back out to you since you're gathered. It is our intent, as long as the community is willing and wishes to participate, we are very much willing and interested in having one or more community charrettes, hopefully a series of them, to engage in dialogue and exchange ideas. I am the land use attorney for the property owner, and I have been in Pinellas County for 40 years doing this. I live in Pinellas County. I've worked in Pinellas County for 40 years. And I think this is the way to do it. Every idea, every opinion is welcome. My only rule of engagement, which I've followed for 40 years, is that we all do it as adults. We be civil. We treat each other with respect. Same for us to you and vice versa. And as long as we can do it the right way, in the human way, we'll be here for as many sessions as you would like to engage in. Everyone's entitled to every opinion, whether it's no development, this development, golf course, whatever. But I strongly encourage you, from having done this for 40 years and literally having done hundreds of these, that we will all come out of the back end of the sausage maker in several months with something that is better for the community and for the county and for ourselves if there's mutual discussion. Now, if when we make an idea, I get that response, it'll be a very short charrette and we won't make much progress. But as long as we can exchange ideas and have our opinions, we would like to start that process. We have reserved this very room for 1 week from tonight, same time, 7 p.m., to have the first charrette for a global discussion and exchange of ideas. We invite you to come. We hope you come. And as long as both sides feel that's productive, we're willing to continue those. We are starting the process of our background data and information to start pulling an application together, but we do not want to get that application together and submit until we've gone through this process with you or determined that you're not willing to go through the process. You have every right to say no thank you, no harm, no foul. And in that case, we'll have to submit our application to go through the public hearing process. But I prefer to do it the right way, and so we're here to reach out, to offer you to engage in that discussion. We will do our level best to be good listeners and to give you ideas and see what can be accomplished. If we come out of it having done nothing but try, that still is a success because it's better than not trying. And so that's what I'm here for. So those of you who wish to come, we welcome you next Tuesday night, 7 p.m., same place. It will be a round table configuration that is more conducive to that discussion, not this audience-style seating. And we'll break into groups and we'll mingle and hopefully interchange ideas. So that's the only reason I'm here, and thank you for just a few minutes of your time.
Can you accept tonight as your first charrette? Your first charrette meeting tonight? Can we count this as one?
Well, the only thing about tonight, you certainly can. We can count this as a charrette, but we really didn't exchange any ideas. So I don't know that we really got anywhere tonight. But we certainly listened. We made notes of everything that was said from the audience, and we're aware of all the comments, and we will continue to do that. So sure, I'm willing to count any discussion as a charrette, but we're hoping to get a lot more accomplished at a charrette than what we did tonight.
Well, we appreciate Mr. Toole coming up here. Last time, the rezoning application, they did the same thing, and so they have a right to try to engage the public.
Andy,
Sir.
can you announce his name to the audience?
Yeah, Mr. Joel Tew, T-E-W, sir? Yes. All right, so what he said is nothing new.
I'd like to raise a question. It's a fundamental question. I know it's but is there a statute or a case law that prohibits a county commissioner, a legislator type body, from talking to the public? I want to know why that restriction exists.
Well, do you want to address that real quick, Blake, and we can break it off for tonight?
I can get you a more formal response, but it's essentially a quasi-judicial matter, and as a result, it's a legislative action, and the Board of County Commission cannot pre-discuss any items that are being brought before them for a decision.
But is there a statute or case law that underwrites what you're saying?
I believe there is, but I'll have to get that citation.
I would like to know, because that whole idea of them being legislators at one moment and then sort of quasi-judicial in another moment, this is foreign to me, because it restricts their right, I would think, to speak out on something. And now we have a situation where there's no application pending. Why can't they speak out and put everybody on notice that they don't like it?
The property owner's representative has communicated their intent to submit an application, and that is what brings the matter into the quasi-judicial forum. And so they have been instructed not to engage in individual discussions and conversations on any matter that's going to be brought before them. They are required to do so in a public hearing format. And so to the extent that you want to communicate with them, you can certainly do so with their appointed representatives on the local planning agency, or you can certainly do so in writing. It's that interaction and that verbal communication that is restricted, to my understanding.
Hey, folks, thanks for coming tonight. Hopefully it was fruitful. Thank you.